Joe Biden doubled down on his decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan as the country overtaken by the Taliban. Joining us now, former National Security Advisor and author of Battlegrounds, The Fight to Defend the Free World, Lieutenant General HR McMaster. Lieutenant General, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Good morning, Jan. It's great to be with you.
You've led soldiers in Afghanistan and served as an advisor to the most senior commanders in the Middle East, Iraq, and Afghanistan. You said you knew that this would be it would be a humanitarian catastrophe of colossal scale. So what additional preparations should have been in place before the U.S. withdrew forces from Afghanistan, do you think?
Well, first of all, Jan, we should have retained safe areas and safe quarters for Afghans to get to evacuation platforms, especially airports. I mean, the idea that we withdrew from Bagram Air Base, from Kandahar Air Base, from the airfield in Kabul, it just doesn't make any sense. But really, what we can do now is we can provide that safe passage. We can open up the civilian side of the Kabul airport, and we need to get as many Afghans out as we can. The Taliban are a brutal terrorist organization, and you saw those harrowing images, the ones that you're showing now. I think that we owe it to them and to humanity to get as many out as we can.
A recent New York Times article stated that President Biden made a series of major mistakes in executing the withdrawal of American troops, leading to all that chaos that we're seeing right now. What are the mistakes you believe he made, and what do you think should have been done differently?
Well, it's really across the last two administrations where these main mistakes have been made, which is really prioritizing withdrawal over the mission there. I mean, we did still have a valid mission, which is to prevent Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations from ever controlling territory and resources again. And, I mean, the reality is that the Taliban is completely intertwined and interconnected with Al-Qaeda. And once you prioritize withdrawal in war, right, there are consequences. I think there was this idea that we could just leave Afghanistan without consequences. And then sadly, Jan, as you're kind of alluding to, I think that we actually took actions on our way out that weakened the Afghan government and weakened the Afghan security forces and strengthened the Taliban. Examples of that are all the concessions we made leading up to the capitulation agreement of 2019, 2020. And this was, first of all, not insisting on a ceasefire. And then, and then forcing the Afghan government to release 5,000 of some of the most heinous criminals on earth who immediately went back to terrorizing the Afghan people. So, if we're going to leave, why don't we just leave, right? Why did we actually strengthen our enemies and weaken our friends on the way out?
Well, the Biden administration, as you mentioned, did place a great amount of blame on the Afghan government for not stepping up to fight for their country. Is that why you believe the Afghan government did not stand their ground against the Taliban?
Absolutely. And, I think what the president didn't mention, and he, I think, dishonored, the sacrifices of so many Afghans, is that tens of thousands of Afghans have given their lives, not only to preserve the freedoms that they enjoyed since the defeat of the Taliban in 2001, but also to fight our common enemies, the enemies of all humanity. I mean, these terrorists with whom we've been engaged since 2001 are the enemies of all civilized peoples. And so the Afghans were fighting for all of us when they made those sacrifices. We removed the glue, I think, that was holding them together. You have to remember that their families are at risk. What the Taliban does, Jana, they go into a house, they go door to door, and they check to see, is anybody in this household serving in the police, in the army? And then if that's the case, they threaten to murder the whole family. And so once the security situation collapsed, Afghan forces really, they had really no option many of them, except to leave the service or else put their families in jeopardy.
Yeah, how's that not terrorism right there, what you just said? In a recent Wall Street Journal op-ed, you addressed the comparison that's now being made between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. You wrote, "Some in Washington drew a bold line between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. In reality, those groups are intertwined, and a Taliban victory is a victory for the group that murdered nearly 3,000 innocent on 9/11. Talk to me about the relationship again between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. What kind of relationship do they have with each other, and how much of a threat do both groups pose to America since the fall of Afghanistan at this point?
Well, remember, it was the Taliban under Mullah Omar who gave Osama bin Laden a safe haven and support base in Afghanistan. And then even after the mass murder attacks of 9/11, refused to give Osama bin Laden up and refused to remove, his hosting or to kick Al-Qaeda out, which is why we invaded Afghanistan. When we didn't commit enough forces in the early campaign to block the withdrawal of Al-Qaeda forces back across the border into Pakistan, that's when Al-Qaeda became central to the Taliban's ability to regenerate itself. So Al-Qaeda worked with the Taliban, financed the Taliban with their international financial networks, and then also worked with Pakistan's inter-services intelligence, the shadowy intelligence arm of the Pakistani army, to reconstitute the Taliban. Those groups have always been and remain completely intertwined. Successive leaders of Al-Qaeda, after have pledged bayat or fealty to the Taliban and the so-called Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. And so when the Taliban wins, Al-Qaeda wins. We keep deluding ourselves about this, Jen. It's kind of crazy. I mean, even in major military operations, we've uncovered some of the largest Al-Qaeda training bases that we've ever seen in Afghanistan. And guess who was running them? The Taliban.
Yeah.
The Taliban was running them and securing them. So we have completely conjured up in Afghanistan the enemy that we would prefer rather than the actual enemy we're fighting to justify our withdrawal.
What implications does the Taliban's takeover of Kabul have right now for Afghanistan's neighbors, Pakistan, India, even China?
Well, there's going to be a massive refugee crisis, and this is what occurred between 1992 to 96 during the Civil War, and then especially during the brutal Taliban rule from 96 to 2001. But the problem now is going to be orders of magnitude larger, right? The vast majority of the Afghan population is under 25 years old, so you're going to have a lot of young people who are displaced. And if you think about it just in terms of scale, Kabul was a city of about 500,000 under the Taliban, right? And now the city has grown because of what we've been able to achieve in Afghanistan since 2001 to a city of nearly 5 million. So if you think about a city of 5 million, now an abject fear and terror, people fleeing, trying to get out as best that they can, that's going to destabilize countries in the region. But then also those refugees will want to go to Europe as well. So I think what we should do right now, Jan, is do everything we can to help the Afghan people get out, right? Especially those who the Taliban are going to murder, torture, imprison, because they tried to build a better life for future generations of Afghans. How
do you think America's involvement with this will affect other nations' views of our American foreign policy?
Well, Jen, when you lose a war, it has consequences, right? And what we're seeing right now is the beginning of the humanitarian catastrophe, but it's also a political catastrophe, as you're alluding to, I think, in connection with our credibility with allies, right? Who's going to partner with us if they think that we're going to not only abandon them, but kind of throw them under the bus on the way out? I mean, if you listen to President Biden's speech, you just think, okay, who wants to side with us, right? And so there's tremendous damage to our reputation as a loyal and dedicated ally and partner. But then also I think that it's going to embolden our enemies and adversaries. The foremost among them are jihadist terrorists. The Taliban is going to claim victory over the world's only superpower. Now, of course, that's not true. I mean, but sadly, we defeated ourselves in Afghanistan. We didn't have the will to sustain a 2,500 soldier, 3,500 soldier, 8,500, whatever the number would be, sustained commitment in Afghanistan when we're fighting on a modern day frontier between barbarism and civilization. So I think this is going to embolden jihadist terrorists, certainly. Remember, in the same way that our withdrawal from Iraq helped set conditions for the rise of Al-Qaeda in Iraq 2.0 after December 2011, which then morphed into the most destructive terrorist organization in history, ISIS, and forced us to go back in 2014. I think we're going to see the same dynamic, Jan. We're actually already seeing it, right? So instead of sustaining a commitment, of a small number of troops, we've now redeployed 3 times that number just to deal with the catastrophe that our precipitous withdrawal triggered.
Former National Security Advisor Lieutenant General HR McMaster, author of Battlegrounds, The Fight to Defend the Free World. We certainly appreciate your time with us this morning, your expertise, your wisdom. Thanks for joining us here on the National Desk and for your service to our country, sir.